So I've started doing color grading for the first time, and it's been a lot of fun for me. I've been having a really good time absorbing all the technical knowledge just however I can, and I like fiddling around with new tools and the feeling of getting familiar with them. I'm really struggling when it comes to stylization and the look. I'm doing my grading, I do my color correction based on the things that I've learned from, like Casey Farris and other YouTube tutorials, and I get to stylizing, and all of the people in these videos and the articles just make decisions very authoritatively and very confidently. They say, I don't like this, I like this, I'm going to do this. I'll fiddle with my look, I'll fiddle with the palette, do what they do in my own way, and then I get stumped. I can't iterate. I don't know where to move forward creatively with color grading to get the look that I want. And I'm not sure what questions I should be asking here.
Let's define stumped. In this context, what possible definitions could we use for that feeling?
I think that, yeah, what I said earlier, this kind of, I can talk to the director about what he wants or like what I think looks good. I'll have a look at the style guides that we wrote a while ago. And once I've done a certain look, once I've added a bit of stylization to it the first time, I don't think I have the language and the knowledge to iterate properly and to translate what it feels like I'm starting cinematography again, because where I'm stumped is that I'm not entirely sure how to translate any of what's in my mind onto the screen.
How do you see color?
Can I ask you how you see color first, so I can see how you mean that question?
No.
Can I ask what you mean? How like in a technical sense, or like?
No.
Yeah.
Scramble.
With my various, what are they, the cones in your eyes that process color? I don't know. How do I see color? I was thinking about this. Thank you for asking that. Yesterday I was on the bus home and it was mid-afternoon, so it was one of those times where I normally struggle to shoot because it's very dark in some spots and very bright in some spots. And I was looking at the trees and I thought, that looks how it looks. I'm seeing these trees the way it looks when I've shot something in the mid-afternoon and I've bumped up the shadows and knocked down the highlights.
Let's try and recontextualize that. How do we define color in image making?
Wow.
And by extension, sorry, I'm about to ethanize this question. Burying it in so many questions that we don't know what the question is.
Ethanizing, yeah, that's nice. Hence ethanizing. It's been it's at the end.
Do you have parameters for color? Do you have parameters for color grading?
No, I don't. I don't think I have I feel that's what I need. Parameters. I need a range and like a language to work in. I don't know how else to put it. Those are very, like, as usual coming from me, those are very meaningless, pretentious, nothing words that are trying to articulate what I'm trying to say, but parameters for color. Oh, man.
There is a clue in the tools you have available to you. And in some ways, this is something that we have seen across a number of different aspects of a cinematographer's creative choices. We want to try and see in what we can do.
Want to see in what we can do? As in see? With your eyes?
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking at my very colorful bookshelf right now.
Let's take a sidestep and see how the seeing that leads to the doing applies in areas where you're now more comfortable.
Okay.
So when you look at a setup for lighting purposes, how do you see?
Is this before or like after the setup has been made? Do you mean as in like when I'm thinking of a setup?
Yes.
Okay. I think in terms of the space that's available, I think in terms of the light that's available and what I know, I'm normally thinking to myself, how can I have two colors appear in this setup? How can I place the camera and the characters in such a way that there's depth, there's something in the background, there's something in the foreground? How can I control whatever light I don't have? Like I'm not in control of like the sun. And normally when I'm like looking at a room, I'll think, okay, I have like I think because I've shot a couple of things lately, I can think to myself very vaguely, I think that with the tools available to me, this will end up looking like, and whenever I think of something that I shoot, I always think this is going to look this is going to have a white and a yellow present in it, and there's going to be a lamp in the background that is particularly bright because I've only really shot rooms, and I'm seeing a close up of a person and a shot reverse shot conversation framing situation. Like I do have sort of an image of the way that I think the things that I shoot look.
It's time to go back to basics, I think.
Yeah.
It's the very first question. And we're not talking about, can we talk kind of like an abstract? No, kind of thinking about actually recording this. No, thinking about resources. No, thinking about schedule.
Okay.
You had free reign. It's the first question you ask yourself.
First question. Normally, where am I shooting this? Or in this hypothetical scenario, do I know where I'm shooting it?
Doesn't matter. We're shooting it in a void.
Where am I shooting it? What are the shots?
We're shooting it in a void.
In a void.
We're shooting it in a void.
Okay.
We're just creating one image.
One image in a void.
Very
of
basics.
A human? Okay.
Yeah.
How do I like that person's face? That's the first thing I think of.
What's the immediate? What's the first question?
Where am I putting my lights? Right. Okay. Yes. Excellent. We've gotten somewhere.
It's the second question.
Normally, how am I lighting those lights? I know that doesn't make any sense, but how am I building my source is normally my second question, I think. Or is it, where am I putting my camera?
What's the question there?
Am I bouncing it? Am I diffusing it? Is it a hard light? Is it this color?
Yes.
Sorry. Oh, so you just straight up mean not even the big questions that contain smaller questions.
No,
straight
I did
up.
say
Okay.
Basics, rudiments.
Gotcha. Right. Okay. So in that scenario, my first question is, where am I putting my lights? Am I bouncing it or am I diffusing it? At what distance? What color? Why?
Yeah, we're skipping some.
I don't know. Can I achieve this blank parameter?
No.
Man, did you know that telling people how to think is actually fascism? Let me think. Go back to...
Remember, we had 4
okay.
questions.
So far, I've said, where are my lights? Am I bouncing them? Am I diffusing them? At what distance? How big is the source?
That's all the same questions.
But I thought they were different questions.
Well, they are follow-on questions, clarification questions.
So then it's just the one question, where am I putting my lights?
No. And audience, I'm not torturing Ethan here out of cruelty, because we have gone through these fundamentals over and over and over.
There is a linear list of questions.
Different classes. So this is telling me quite a bit.
Well, if I return to my notes document, I'm sure it's somewhere. My ancient, dusty notes document. Wow, if I type the word questions into search on that document, it does not show up. That's very worrying. Here we go. Okay. I've got here... Now, this is a list that you gave us a while ago about, while looking at an image that already exists, but these questions work while building an image as well. Where did they put the light? Wait, no, this is all follow-on questions. Things like, what is the shadow pattern? What is the shadow definition? Is it bounced or diffused? Is there fill light? How bright does it feel? Is more light being used, or is a singular light being shaped? I've got those written down.
My point here is we've got 4 rudiments of how we see light, and that equals 4 behaviors or qualities of light. 1, direction. Where does the light come from? I.e., where do I need to place my light source in order to give it that direction? Number 2, diffuse quality. I bounce it, I diffuse it, where do I go high? Number 3, contrast. This looks like it's not jogging any memory.
No, this is jogging a memory. I'm just listening deeply. These are just the qualities of light, which I'm sure if I type in qualities of light.
So, because cameras see dynamic range differently than human vision, do we need to do something about that dynamic range to get it where we need it to be? Usually, the first go-to there is fill light. Number 4. This one is less well defined, and I'm kind of bunching a lot of different things into it. It may be time to expand the questions, but we'll see. Image brightness, is that solely connected to the intensity of your key light source, your main light source?
No.
What other factors go into the overall sense of brightness of the image?
How much of the image is bright and how much of it is dark, like the actual amount of light in the image, whether it be like the background or the foreground or on the subject, which is if you can detect whether an image is high key or low key.
And it's usually by how much of the background, how much of the environment is relative to how much of the subject.
Like up until just now, my image was fairly high key, but now it's less so. I think if a cloud passed, but if I like closed this, for example, that's a low key image, even though I'm pretty bright and there's a light behind me. And
yes, exactly. Even though the lighting of Ethan's face hasn't changed intensity, the whole image feels brighter or darker because the environment is more or less lit up.
And now it's a bit high key because
my point being,
things.
If you can learn to see the environment in what you can do, it's going to be a lot easier to do.
So are we about to learn about the qualities of color? Please say yes. Please say yes.
Think of these 4 basic qualities of light as tools, things you can manipulate. And any other parts that you want to do something about needs to be translated into those tools, for lack of a better word. That's where all the expression and feeling comes into it. Needs to be translated into direction, diffuse quality, contrast, background lighting, i.e. high key, low key.
I remember doing that when I shot that short. I was like, how do I want this scene to look? And I would write it down as the 4 qualities of light. I want this to be like this. I want this to be like this.
So we have ways of seeing. We want to see in ways we can do.
So we want to translate that to color.
In lighting, we have parameters of light that we can manipulate, which then govern how we see, because if we don't have a parameter that we can control and manipulate, then there's no way we can achieve what we see. There is a clue in the tools you have available in color grading. Tells you something about how we should see the image.
What tools? Scopes?
So do they actually manipulate the image?
Do you mean just the tools in general? Things like, the S-curve, /curve, the weird spider web thing that you can use for the palette that I don't fully understand yet. The offset, the little thing that you can use to move the highlights and shadows up and down.
History may not repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes.
It's like Star Wars.
We've skipped the basics again.
Okay.
We've gone for the C screen.
Okay. So the tools, things like contrast, saturation, exposure, like the absolute basics, those things that you have to correct. Temperature. So okay, I'm following. So I walk into a room with that's completely black. I walk into a room that's completely black, save one light that's pointed straight at the floor. This is a very high contrast world I've just walked into. This is very contrasty. Or I walk into a room, a ball pit. I think it's a very, very saturated looking area. Or I'm inside a giant oven. I think, the color temperature here is pretty warm. Is that what you mean? Even though all of those things sounded completely deranged?
Somewhere.
Okay.
The other clue you've got is in the file structure. How do we store color information in a digital image?
Great question.
Isn't it?
Right, of course. Do you mean just like the RGB pixels themselves, or... Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I was worried that it was something like more filey, the raw information picked up by the sensor that translates into the...
Okay. Can we treat the word raw in terms of color with...
Yes, a lot of care. Sorry, not raw literally. That is not what I meant. I did not mean raw format. I will avoid that word. The initial RGB readings in each pixel. The red, the green, and the blue. I always forget which of them there's two of. Is there 2 blues or 2 reds in the pixel? Please help me.
Did I just say about not going to raw?
Yeah.
Again, basics.
I'm just going to say RGB and leave it at that.
There. A lot of the way we think about color comes from the way we store color in a tri-stimulus or 3-channel model. So RGB is about color mixing. We don't have the technology to be able to store every single possible color. However, there are several aspects of the RGB model that isn't particularly intuitive. If we go out in everyday life and ask someone, is color X violet? Yes or no? Everyone can intuitively say that,
Yeah.
right? Within 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm bad at colors.
As in, if we show like a primary yellow and ask people, unless they are colorblind or they've got some other underlying vision impairment, we ask them, is this violet? Yes or no? Majority of people are going to say
No.
However, if we give them an RGB value for that yellow, how many people are going to be able to answer, is this violet? Yes or no?
Very few people, if not no one.
So the RGB color model, although an efficient model of storing color information, is not very intuitive, and a lot of creativity doesn't deal well with efficiency of communication. It wants to deal more with gut feeling, right? So can we make use of 3 channels of information to more closely model the way we think about color creatively?
Yeah.
So a lot of the ways we think about color ends up being, okay, can we flip the way we use these 3 channels of information?
Right.
So the RGB color mixer is probably, or some sort of color mixer model of describing color is probably the least intuitive. In everyday language, when we think about color, how do we describe color?
With adjectives, normally, in my experience, this was such and such was a very bright red, such and such was a very...
Before that even.
Oh.
We just did it.
Red. Right. Okay. So just like as a color. Green.
The actual color. And that doesn't fit in the RGB color mixer, right? So can we make it fit? Yes, we can, by giving the actual color a hue. That's then taken up one of the channels.
So you're hang on, let me just see if I can follow. You're replacing, say describing the really impractical way of describing a color, which would be like saying it as their RGB value with instead describing the hue. It's got a blue hue. It's got a yellow hue. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
What that leaves is 2 more axes or channels of information, and you did describe them.
Saturation and either contrast or temperature or brightness.
Lightness.
Oh,
bright or dark. My point is to start kind of unraveling, breaking down some of these parameters and start looking for them rather than kind of going, is this good?
But instead thinking,
what can you do? What can you change?
And in this case, what should the RGB value be? You can think to yourself, how can I change the hue? What hue do I want it to be?
Or just in layman's terms, like color.
What color?
So the temperature is hue.
That's a very good point. I've always been confused by that. What's the point of color temperature if hue exists?
The actual hue control is different.
Right.
We can get back to that. Generally, think back, how did I learn this?
Fair enough.
I'm not sure I remember specific steps, to be honest.
I'm sure there weren't any specific steps.
I think that there is an even more fundamental way of seeing that most people skip. Is color grading just about color?
Right.
Sorry, that was me asking you.
Oh. No. I think it's also about contrast and brightness, and the things that you would call correction, you aren't just making it more pink.
Are they only correction?
Yeah, they're also like creative choices as well. But like things, how contrasty do you want the image to be? How bright do you want the image to be?
Do you remember terms for what's color in an image and what's not color?
I don't. Let me think. No, I don't. I will remember them when you mention them, probably, like the classic trope. Just going to turn around.
Luma and Chroma.
Right. When I picture the terms Luma and Chroma, I think to myself of that scale between white and black, or like white to grey to black, for Luma, and then sort of the regular old color wheel / color scale for Chroma. But I could be completely wrong. Or that could be completely meaningless.
That can be a useful way of starting to separate the two. We can think of Luma as the black and white portion.
Yeah.
So if we made the image just black and white, that would be working with the Luma. Now, colorists will have different approaches to these, and they may not agree with each other, and they may not agree with me. I would probably say, as long as you get your basic corrections in place, i.e., if things are grossly underexposed, overexposed, the white balance is way off, get that sorted first, i.e. your
Mm.
correction. Next step for me, I would recommend start with Luma, because at the heart of every good image is a good black and white image.
I was about to ask, I feel like I've heard of some colorists or like post-production people who do their exposure and contrast corrections in black and white. I feel like I've heard of people doing that before, and then they return the image to color to do their color grading and stuff. I will need to probably find evidence of that fact because it could be literally a lie.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it's not a bad way of going about it. I think we're like outside of the extremes. If we're talking like middle of the road, we're probably more sensitive to Luma changes than we are to Chroma changes. The obvious place to start with Luma is exposure. The second place is probably contrast. And how do we define contrast?
The difference between the darkest and brightest parts of the image, how much of a gap there is between those two things.
So conceptually, in terms of seeing, rather than diving straight into the curves tools or contrast and pivot or whatever, like actual physical tool, let's start there. Define your contrast by where do you want your white point to sit and where do you want your black point to sit.
And that's kind of one of the issues, is that the simple questions like that, I'm not sure quite how to answer in terms of getting. Yeah, good point.
Experiment.
Look at it. See, is that good enough? Is that not? Is that what I want? I have found that a lot of the process has been kind of finding what I like as I do it.
But also in terms of like when you look at images, ask those questions.
Right.
Now, most of your image information actually sits in between.
Right.
So we've got highlights, we've got shadows. So
I'm not following.
What do you think we call the in between?
Shylights, hallows, mids. There's definitely a term for this because I see it on every single software I use. And by every single software, I mean Premiere and DaVinci, only two of them. And it's mid something. Midtones.
Midtones.
I got there first.
So now we're dividing up the grayscale. Right. And you see like we've got the three parameter thing going in again. Highlight, midtones, shadows. We call these tonal ranges. Start thinking a little bit about like where do you want your ranges to sit? Start playing around with that.
Okay.
And we can divide this up even finer. So what are the actual like hands-on or mouse on or cursor on tools that you've actually been using for color grading?
So far, I've used the contrast curve.
As in, sorry, the actual contrast control or the curves?
I've used the curves for contrast at the behest of Casey Farris. A lot of what I've done is very Casey Farris informed, which is why I'm also asking you, because I'm not a huge fan of like taking all the information from one person. And I'm very fond of your correction workflow that you've told me about, which is your 3 correction things first, and then everything else later. Anyway, I've used the contrast curve, normally in the shape of an S, sometimes in the shape of an opposite S, because it looks better like that sometimes. I've used, for exposure, the offset slider. I think that's what it is, the offset slider. I think that's the right one. I could literally open DaVinci right now and check, but that would ruin the recording. For temperature, no, I'm not talking about that yet. Contrast.
So I think personally,
what's the 4th one? Exposure, contrast.
Curves are a useful tool, but I'm not sure it's really teaching you to see.
They do kind of confuse me.
And it can be a bit messy.
Right.
I guess the other big question to ask as well is how invested are you in learning color grading?
That's the thing. I feel it's something that I found myself quite enjoying. I think I don't know how to answer that question properly right now because I'm still quite bewildered by it. I'm not sure how much time I should be spending on it.
Okay. That, unfortunately, is one of those answers that's going to be, well, you're going to have to sort that out.
Yeah. And however, again, I've noticed that now that I've started doing it and I feel like I have a surface level understanding of DaVinci, which was the wall that I needed to break down. Now that I'm at that point, whenever I shoot something, I always kind of go like, I want to grade this, even if it's like wildly inconvenient for all of us because our workflow means that we're all very far away from one another. So I definitely want to grade the stuff that I shoot. And I'm very interested in grading because I feel like it's...
That's not the question.
I know. I know. I'm just sorting through my thoughts. Hang on. Uh,
The reason I'm asking is the journey is different if you want to get to a certain level for look development in the general versus you want to make the projects you're shooting currently look good.
the latter is what I want. That's definitely where I'm sitting. I want to make the projects I'm shooting currently look good, which I realize is not ideal.
Bring on board a colorist.
Damn it. Okay. Yeah. That's fair. That's actually a very good idea. I don't know why I used that tone just then. I don't know if I know any colorists. I might have to start paying someone or getting someone to volunteer or grabbing people from the like outsourcing people, which is new.
Personally, I don't think coloring a specific project that has some sort of delivery deadline is a good way of learning.
Oh, okay.
At the stage you are at, I would say learn to see color before you color.
Wow. Okay.
Learn how color works. Learn what you can and can't do before trying to apply it with the pressure of an end product in mind.
Right. Huh. Okay.
That's why I'm asking that question about how invested are you. If you're not that invested, then go forward and hire colorists, bring in colorists, like whatever. But trying to pick up how to get past the stump, so to speak, by doing an actual project. Personally, I don't think the mental kind of achievement pressure of the performance anxiety, so to speak, is conducive for learning color principles.
Right.
As in, like, if you need to color or grade a project, then you're probably better off learning techniques rather than principles, like a more template-based learning. Is that gets
which I think
you
is
to,
probably the direction that I've been inadvertently steering myself.
yes.
Yeah, which is this is how it's done kind of way.
I think in some ways that's the approach of a lot of YouTube tutorials, because that's what a lot of people want. They don't necessarily see themselves as colorists when they start kind of going, how do I do X? How do I, like, why aren't my images looking great?
Yeah, I'm more just thinking this seems like a very useful thing to know.
How do I fix this particular
and how do I
project?
fix this? I'm sick of looking at stuff that I've made in log. I'm sick of looking at the Rec 709 conversion. What can I do about this?
That's different to how do I see color?
Okay.
And if we apply the methodology from camera and lighting to color grading, then if you can't see, you can't do.
It sounds to me like it's more important that I'm able to articulate what I want because I can see what I want and know what I want ahead of time than it is that I can just do something. It lets me reach my desired look with more specificity and ease. Is that what that's what you mean?
Rather than saying make it better, it's not good enough, it's not good, being able to break down contrast too high, highlights are blurred, shadows are clear.
Right.
Like things that you can actually do something about. And until you see in those terms, then A, you're not going to be able to do it yourself. You can't see what doesn't work with the image, or B, you can't communicate it.
Okay. It almost sounds like I should find a way to give myself a number of somewhat bad looking images just so I can figure out what specifically is wrong with them and then fix them.
Me personally, I would never ever call myself a colorist, and that's because my strength in that area lies in look development. Hands on, I'm nowhere near good enough in terms of correction and balancing and fixing.
So you can tell a colorist what you want and know what you want, and that's what you need.
Yes. As in, I can go and make my test grades on individual still images in Resolve, but ask me to create a whole project where I actually need to match shots before I look and all that kind of stuff. You wouldn't want me doing that.
Right.
I could potentially do it, but it wouldn't be in a timely manner, and it'd be a very painful, frustrating process.
Right. So
I'm not 100% sure whether trying to fix, let's call them suboptimal images, is the best path. Well, it depends. Like if you want to be a colorist, then absolutely, there's definitely bread and butter in that. So I guess the big question is like, why color grading for you individually, specifically?
Like, why am I concerned about it right now?
Aha! So we've taken nearly an hour to get to the real
Yeah.
question.
Well, let's recap before we get to the real question, before we lead up to the finale. You've made it very clear to me how important it is to see in the parameters that I'm trying to work in. You've got that idea of the minute stake, looking at an image, like trying to define it by its qualities of light in a second, giving myself 3 seconds to think about it, and then writing that down.
That's more about like getting back to
Yeah.
basics, getting back to rudiments.
Getting back to rudiments, and then kind of making that a subconscious response, trying to see in those parameters, which you've translated to color, which I think is pretty nice. However, I was not expecting you to ask about what I actually wanted to do with color. You've kind of shaken away this sort of preconception that I have that all DPs need to be a little bit of a colorist. I'm not sure where that came from.
I never said that.
I definitely just invented
it. I'm not saying that I
think it's
discourage that.
because you didn't discourage it. You just kind of, I wasn't sure how much of the process was what the DP actually did or just knowing what to say to a colorist. And I think it's because I haven't had a colorist to say things to, nor anyone else to articulate that sort of information to. So now I'm inclined to look for a colorist or someone I know who does color. So the big question you said was, why color grading?
For you specifically,
like right now?
Individually. Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a new facet of the whole experience that I'm only really getting familiar with now. So I'm very curious about it and I'm excited by it. I'm learning a new thing. And whenever I learn a new thing, I'm always thinking, how much of this should I spend my time on? Am I spending my time on the right elements of it? Am I learning this correctly? Am I taking this all in? Am I taking in relevant information right now? Yeah.
Comparison to the ideal curve again.
Very true.
We've got a couple of different ways we can go about this. We can go on a general kind of exploration of, I guess we call it color grading look development, or let's call it like color grading, or like general kind of look exploration, or we can do more of a case study and try and like take apart some existing looks and try and derive questions to ask ourselves, parameters to try and see.
Okay. I think a good starting point is trying to find how I can word the looks of existing pieces of media. I don't know why the Matrix pops into my head. I'm not entirely sure why that's happening, but it has a very distinct look. But I don't know if I can put it to words.
I want to push a little bit further back into history and also beyond movies.
Oh, okay.
Like Luma and Chroma has existed in art well before.
Good point.
Movies.
Is this our exciting cliffhanger lead up to Art History Part 2?
Where do I want to start? I'm thinking more methodology now in terms of, do I set you some homework you could go and explore?
I do love me some homework. I love being told what to do. It's wonderful.
Okay, so let's see if we can find some examples of split toning.
It's something that I've technically done, split toning. Oh, do you mean like put it in my to-do list, for example?
So at the moment, I'm not looking for how to do it. I'm looking for you to find examples.
Split toning,
cross processing, and bleach bypass. Okay.
Right.
So
is this by next week?
Yeah, we can do that. Try as much as you can to avoid how-tos. All I'm looking for at this stage is examples, and we're going to try and find a language that is actionable to describe what we see.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I'm very excited, actually. I'm kind of pumped. We could ask our viewers potentially to do this as well, if they so desire. That's enough. They'll get the point. They'll figure it out.
The other part that we can look at as well is, you said you'd been looking at color palettes. How do you go about that?
No clue. I've been fiddling with the palette section. I think there's also those images on Instagram, which is like a shot from a movie, and then all the colors that are in the palette at the very bottom. But I can't really fully define it, I think
an exercise there would be to generate your own palettes. Let's start with seasons, time of day, and weather.
And just generate those palettes as I see fit?
Yep. So pick the prompt first.
So if I were to, let's say, if I pick a palette for a rainy day, do you mean like...
And time of day
Right,
and
okay.
season.
A rainy summer day at like in the noon, like a sun shower situation. And I would say rainy summer day
Yeah.
in the afternoon.
Yep.
Yellows and white and probably green. That's really where my understanding of palette kind of falls away.
Yeah, and also I think maybe don't worry about being too strict about it, but trying to work in the 60-30-10 principle a bit.
So 60 of this color, 30 of this color, 10 of this color? Okay, that's excellent. It actually helps me a lot.
But yeah, please don't get hung up in like, oh, is that 57 or is it 62? Or so that thing being, there should be a dominant color, there should be a contrasting color, and then there should be an accent.
Oh, okay. So
that's the idea. So this comes from interior design, I believe. So the dominant color would be the walls. That's the majority of the surfaces in the room, right? The contrasting color, the secondary color would be like the major pieces of furniture. And then you've got a few little splashes of different color just to give it to that. Right?
Wow. I've never heard of that rule before in my entire life, the 60-30-10 rule.
Shall we flog a poor deceased equine?
You've already told me? Have you already told me this?
This baffles me. That we're going through like a visual arts education and things like color design, 60-30-10. Either it's presumed that you come into a course with this, or it's just not put anywhere in the curriculum. Same with the thinking of Luma, Chroma, tonal ranges. It just boggles my mind. That whole
as well.
discussion we had about like presumed prior knowledge in something like a filmmaking degree. I guess on the other hand, I'm trying to think where I've picked up this knowledge. So Luma Chroma, the tools have been there, if that makes sense, as in picking it up through things like Photoshop. So that kind of leads back to kind of like in terms of color and color grading, like learn to see in the parameters you can manipulate.
Yeah.
Things like the 60-30-10, definitely no formal teaching on that. So I guess for my generation, it was kind of presumed knowledge.
Wow.
Now, do you feel like you've got something actionable to move forward with?
I'm chuffed. Chuffed, I tell you. Sum up. So we've started off at color and moved over to the way that we talk about these things and the way that we see them. And the idea of seeing in the parameters that we're meant to be working, breaking it down to rudiments, as you said, which led us to a brief recap of our qualities of light. And as a really large example, how we can break the way that we see not only the world, but also the images in front of us into those qualities of light to further our instinctual understanding of, okay, that light's there. Let's see this over here. Shadow is that deep. Let's see that far away. That sort of immediate response. So you can kind of build that language, which you've taken into color, being able to kind of see in the way that you work, not necessarily in RGB values, but instead in hue and contrast and all of these kind of broader translations of the really small technical stuff of color, and not getting overwhelmed with the technical stuff if, like me and you're in a position where you don't want to be a colorist specifically. You just want to be able to define a look, and you have the language to define a look if you start seeing in that language. If I'm able to say to someone, I want the hue to be green, I would like it to be, well, I don't have the language yet, so I can't really give you an example, but hopefully that makes sense.
An overall important principle is your vision informs your language and your language informs your vision.
Right.
It goes both ways. Sorry, is that you processing, or were you waiting for me?
I'm just thinking. Bear with. I don't really have anything else to add on to that. I think it's a really good point. So I suppose I just need to work on building that language, which is going to be a part of being able to define and visualize palettes, and also just kind of trawl through examples of specific terms and ideas and kind of embed them into my brain.
So I think we ended up with a couple of little tasks.
We've got tasks.
So what were those examples?
Well, you've asked me, sorry if the screens are going to disappear right now, I've got window display. You've asked me to look for an example of split toning, or examples of split toning, examples of cross-processing, and bleach bypass, and I'm to avoid how-tos. Just unfiltered examples of those things, just so I can burn into my brain what those things look like.
And find the language.
Yeah. Exciting. I'm excited. I'm pumped, as they say.
So there you have it.
That's
folks.
it, I guess.
I think we have discolored Ethan's brain, and hopefully we've started coloring it back in a little bit.
It's all grey in there. It's all grey. Like a cadaver? I'm going to stop talking. See you next week, people. Have fun thinking about color grading.